Alrighty, final thoughts here. Uh, I was really impressed with how Barry's performed. I know that last match was a little disappointing in terms of how well Barry's could punch through control, but every deck has its bad matchups, and I think that was just definitely not a good matchup for Barry's. But what I will say is I think the format is doing well enough, given the fact that there's a solid enough diversity of control decks, of these aggressive decks. The aggressive decks did kind of struggle in this field, but I do think people are just sort of figuring out what aggressive decks work best, and I do think they're pushed out a bit by how well control decks can really recoup card advantage through Harbor Mail. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but for now, let's just sort of talk about the deck, talk about the format. I think I like the format a lot. I know a lot of people are inclined to disagree with that opinion. Um, and I think there are definitely some things that could be better about the field. But I think the bones of a really fun meta are here. There's just a couple cards that are power outliers, which is pretty much to be expected for a month one season. No real balance changes hitting the things that are problematic yet. And even then, I shudder to think what this format would have looked like with launch version Tanky. Um, that card being adjusted really did help shape a format that was, I think, much more reasonable, but still with some power outliers. And I think Barry's, despite only two players bringing it to the tournament and only one of those two players making it to top cut, I think Barry's is one of those power outliers in the field right now. I think the only reason it's not like putting up as crazy results that other decks are is because no one's really people were tinkering with it in the first few days of the format, and then everyone kind of just moved on, it seems, from berries to try other things. And I could be wrong. Please, by all means, shout out to me if you've been trying something like this list and been struggling. But I know a lot of people really went in on, berries mid range. We just do the mid range grindy things, and get run over by control, get run over by Harbor Mail decks. And I felt like that wasn't going to cut it. I think I felt, you had to have that scrap weight plan to be able to just burn out your opponent. And Scrap Weight was a card I think a lot of people really slept on. And I feel like I got to kind of put it through its paces this tournament. It won us the match against Ricky Rister. One of the games that we won was because we had Scrap Weight off the top to give us the extra points of damage with Smiling Sludge. So, there are cases where Scrap Weight can do its job as a 1 mana instant speed, sacrifice all of your artifacts with Smiling Sludge in play. And that's something that I think is really, really important. Um, I think if there's one card in this deck that I think is a bit problematic, uh, it's not anything to do with the berries. I think Extraction Ritual is still too good. I think Ritual is definitely a lot worse than it was at launch. For those unfamiliar, Extraction Ritual used to gain you 1 life instead of losing you 1 life. I think that version was crazy, and a lot of people played it for a reason. But, after its change, people have not been as high on it, to my understanding. I think it is a very good card in this deck in particular. There's enough disposable creatures. I think more disposable creatures alongside Pathetic Cocoon could be nice. But even then, we got turn one Cocoon into turn two Ritual multiple times across the first two matches, and it really did a lot to help us get very secure, very comfortable, very fast. So there is something to be said for the power of a turn one Cocoon there. Into turn two Extraction Ritual. I think the big issue with Extraction Ritual is I think right now the two biggest problem points for me in the format are 1 mana draw two or more card spells. Extraction Ritual is one of those. You get to sacrifice a trinket artifact, sacrifice a trinket creature, and discard a card that's not important in your hand to go draw three, put 3/1/1s in play for the cost of paying 3 life. And I think that is a very, I think the costs are very mitigatable. They can be very easily, irrelevant or possibly even beneficial to you in some situations. So I think, I like the deck building challenge that Extraction Ritual provides, but I think my big issue with Ritual is that. And I'll be expressing all of this in the feedback form as well. The community has a wonderful feedback form to provide to curators. So curators can have a beat on how players are feeling rather than just kind of having to guess based on players, uh, you know, saying they don't like the way a card operates currently. Um, So I'll be expressing this all to curators, but for any curators watching, anything that I express in the feedback form, I'm also going to be communicating here. So if you want an audio version of my feedback form, here it is. Extraction Ritual, I think, is just too much card advantage for what it is. One of the things that came up a lot was its interaction with Yeji. I think is a little messed up. I'm not sure the correct way to time this. I always felt like it was a little bit cheating, but my understanding of the rules is that it works exactly how I want it to every time. Because you're discarding, sacrificing to Extraction Ritual as a cost. Whatever you sacrifice and whatever you discard to Extraction Ritual is an eligible target for Yeji if Ritual is what is amping it up for you. I think if I had been more keenly aware of this particular interaction going into the tournament, I maybe would have even tried to get these Yejis in the main deck rather than the sideboard, because I boarded them in almost every single game. They were really, really important. So with that in mind, I think Ritual just a little much. I talked a bit about Harbor Mail. A lot of people wanting Harbor Mail to see a bit of a change, myself included. I think that is really, really the sore point. Is that right now there are two cards that are both very good 1-mana draw engines that require very minimal amounts of effort. For Extraction Ritual, you get a Pathetic Cocoon in play into Extraction Ritual. Or a Smart Shopper in play, and then on your combo turn you get your Smart Shopper trigger, and then you just burn Shopper in one of the berries, and then Extraction Ritual. I think it's, especially when it makes 3 more berries off of Berry Master. Ritual just does so much work at padding your hand, padding your board. For very minimal investment, very minimal deck building requirements. And much in the same way, Harbor Mail does that as well. Of, you put in Harbor Mail, you put in a couple good surface cards, and you don't have to really play the bad surface cards. You don't have to, jump, you don't have to bend over backwards for the bad surface cards to get a lot of value out of Harbor Mail. And even then, some of the bad surface cards look a little bit better. I think Muddy Water, I underrated, I kind of talked down the potential of Muddy Water in the set review. Muddy Water looks great when you have a Harbor Mail sitting to the side, because Harbor Mail is uninteractable. Make your removal spell cantrip, Surveil 1 and cantrip. Make your next removal spell, make your next sleight of hand effect come with a free Eavesdrop. For those unfamiliar, Eavesdrop is Consider from Canon. Eavesdrop is the one that we have in our format from Viridian's last mission, which is the 7th set that was ever in the format. So having that like double Surveil 1 draw a card just kind of incidentally for 1 mana has proven to be very, very dominant, and I think that is evident by 5 of the 10 decks that made it to top cut out of the Swiss round were on 4 copies of Harbor Mail. I think that is a testament to just how good that is. Our opponent on a control deck, only sorcery in the main deck was Harbor Mail. With only 3 service cards, because even just on its base rate, a sorcery speed Eavesdrop, sorcery speed Consider is fine. But being able to get that additional value makes something like Seafloor Treasures so much better. And I already thought that card was pretty decent. So Extraction Ritual and Harbor Mail, I think, is the big pressure point that I think needs to be alleviated going into next month. I think Harbor Mail is the big one. A lot of people have eyes on Harbor Mail, but I do think Ritual is a component of that as well. Moving on to the rest of the deck, I know a lot of people are looking at berries as something that needs to get changed. I think people have some strong opinions about what cards in the deck are problematic. I don't align with a lot of people. I know I've seen some people talking about Smart Shopper needing a change, needing to not be a cast trigger. I think Smart Shopper's fine. Smart Shopper is, the reason I'm on 3 copies of this rather than 4 is I thought it was just a fine enough card. And, when it is making 3 berries, it is phenomenal. But I think those berries are really phenomenal contextually based on the ways that you're spending those berries. Making those 3 berries and then being able to burn them all to a scrap weight with Smiling Sludge in play is great. Making those berries so you have 3 mana off of casting a Berry Fermenter immediately is great. But when Smart Shopper is just kind of sitting around and making 1 berry or no berries a turn, if you're like struggling to hit your creature spells, that's a really, really rough floor. And I think the average case of this is like making one berry a turn, sometimes making three berries, is still really predicated on how good your ways of spending those berries are. I think what that quarterfinals match really puts on display is when you're pushed into a position of having to use the berries fairly, there's still absolutely an avenue to victory using the berries the way that they are intended to, with their equip and with their actual replacement effect for damage. You can absolutely win that way, but it becomes significantly more difficult. The hill you have to climb up becomes much more steep. And I think in that respect, it's not so much an issue of Smart Shopper being too good as much as the ways that you're spending trinket artifacts that are too good. And I think there are ways to spend those trinket artifacts that are fine. I think this is still, this is a great card for Cyber Soul cards, still a great card with General Diadem Usurper. And I think those interactions might just be fine. I think those interactions aren't going to be too problematic. I think they might actually be a really interesting way to contextualize Smart Shopper. And I think this card could probably be fine going into future seasons. I think what's not fine is Berry Fermenter. I think this card is a little messed up. I was kind of low on it in the set review again, but I got to play it, and Berry Fermenter is the truth. This thing makes you so much mana, and we saw that in a couple of the rounds earlier on in the tournament of Berry Fermenter just getting to come down, and immediately you have access to so much mana with just a couple berries in play, especially if it's following up a Smart Shopper. It makes Smiling Sludge turns infinitely easier to just sort of grind out a bunch of damage out of nowhere. This card, I think, I would go so far as to say, I think this is the most powerful piece in the berry package. I think being able to convert berries to treasure mana is so good, in part because of how free berries can be to make sometimes. Pathetic Cocoon makes one or two. You can just, block with a Pathetic Cocoon to make a second one, or sacrifice it to a Deadly Dispute or an Extraction Ritual. And then that gets you another berry, which gets you more mana with Berry Fermenter. And we even, I think if I remember correctly, we did even activate this to sacrifice a berry to gain 3 at one point. So Berry Fermenter really getting to put in some work this tournament. I don't want to comment on where the card should go too much. I'm not one of the designers or curators, so I don't really get a say in all of this. But if I may, just sort of posit where I'd love to see this deck heading. I know a lot of folks are always worried that, card adjustments and nerfs are going to kind of kill certain decks, and a lot of people are scared off of a deck when enough cards get adjusted out of it. My hope for berries is that it kind of equalizes into a more standardized place where the free ways of sacrificing berries are really toned back, and we get to see a lot of them thrive a lot better. What I would love to see from Berry Fermenter is for it to gain a tap ability. For it to be what itself is sacrificing the berries rather than conferring that ability to something else. Both because, then it's, susceptible to summoning sickness, especially if it's a tap ability. But also, kind of peeking at my hopes for the deck a little bit. I would love for this to be a contest coordinator deck. I think contest coordinator, this is, I think I mentioned this a little bit. And I might have mentioned this in my deck tech. I've been tinkering with a contest coordinator version of berries for a little while, and I think being able to play contest coordinator and A Journey Begins is a really exciting potential to have. So, I can't help but want to play both. And, if Berry Fermenter gains an activated ability to sacrifice the berries rather than conferring that ability to the berries themselves, that makes it a valid hit off of Contest Coordinator. So, a little bit of opinion there on, I think, it would be nice for Contest Coordinator to slot into berries, especially since it can find Berry Master, find Diadem. But it doesn't find Feasting Predator anymore because it stopped having an activated ability in the launch of the format, or sorry, the launch of this set in rotation. Doesn't find Smiling Sludge, doesn't find Smart Shopper, does find Scrap Weight, but we'll get to you. Doesn't find Pathetic Cocoon. So, there's still some things that Coordinator misses. It hits Diadem. Is I think the big thing is I really want to play berries with Diadem and Contest Coordinator being able to find Diadem or, Berry Master, maybe Berry Fermenter. I don't know. But I think that is the ideal way of make it so summoning sickness actually matters. Getting the Berry Fermenter down doesn't just immediately pop you off. Even if it's as simple as a tap ability to give your berries those abilities until end of turn. I don't think that would be necessarily the healthiest change, but just sort of spitballing ways to fix the problem that the problem that is berry fermenter. Beyond that, the other big problem card in this deck is scrap weight. I think this card is messed up. I've been ringing that bell. I know a lot of berries players are not on scrap weight still, and I think they're making a mistake. We got to put on display that scrap weight is very good at just killing the opponent. Instant speed, sacrifice any number of artifacts, burn your opponent with Smiling Sludge is just very good at doing the count until you have enough artifacts to go over your opponent's life total. And it worked. It worked pretty well. So I don't know how scrap weight will or should get changed. I don't know if it. I don't know if it will get changed. If it doesn't get changed and there's enough berry cards that survive whatever changes get applied to them, I think berry players get on scrap weight. That is my big bell I'm going to ring here. Is either scrap weight should be changed or you should be playing scrap weight if you're still on berries, and berry still works. This card plus Smiling Sludge is messed up. Speaking of Smiling Sludge, I think this card's fine. I think this card is perfectly fine. I think it's a bit egregious right now, but I think the things that make it egregious are largely things that need to be toned in for other reasons as well. And the best way to tone those in is to limit how freely you can sacrifice things. And I think, once sacrificing comes at a real cost, rather than just burning a bunch of berries for the sake of burning a bunch of berries, Smiling Sludge gets a lot less scary. I think there are worlds where berries decks are not on Smiling Sludge at all in the future, depending on how the sack outlets for berries and other artifacts get changed. Even with Diadem being a free sacrifice outlet going into the next format, probably still being a free sacrifice outlet going into the next format, I don't think if scrap weight and berry fermenter get hard enough changes that keep them from sacrificing things really aggressively, I don't think there's a world where you do play Smiling Sludge in a Diadem build of this deck, which is I think a little heretical to say to some people, but I think this card is very good at what it does, but it's very powerful because of other powerful cards, and without those other powerful cards, as kind of on display in that final round that we played in the quarterfinals, we did the thing. We got Smiling Sludge in play a couple times, and it kind of just sat there, maybe chipped away at our opponent for a couple points of damage. Definitely did threaten lethal when the time came, but that was because we were using berries fairly, and both times we kind of got blown out. Or we didn't quite have enough mana to be able to push the lethal that we were hoping for. So Smiling Sludge is fine. I think it's a good enough card to keep around as is. I think the only other problem, there's only one other problematic card in the berry package right now, besides berry fermenter, and that's Berry Master. I think this card is kind of ridiculous. I think there's two big sore points for me on Berry Master as far as how powerful it is right now, and that is its replacement effect and the life gain on its activated ability. I think that life gain on the activated ability is a bit too much. Being able to not only shred the board while applying more pressure to your opponent, but also padding your life total to make crackbacks weaker is just a lot. In terms of how well it locks down the board, I think Berry Master single-handedly wins, more creature-centric matchups when it goes unchecked. And we saw that, right? We saw Berry Master winning the Consonance matchup pretty handily. This card, if you can't check it, if you can't remove the Berry Master, you will lose. And that life gain is a major component because it really takes away the option of killing the berry player, slipping under them. So I think that life gain is not the most egregious part of Berry Master, but it's definitely a sore point for me. I feel dirty gaining that life. It feels wrong. I feel like I shouldn't be also getting the life on top of removing a thing and growing my creatures. I think that replacement effect is also a little strong. Creating that many berry tokens opens the door for things like Extraction Ritual making 6 tokens, Imposing Iteration making 6 tokens. I think that's a little much. I don't know how the best way to change that would be. I don't know the best way to change any of these cards ultimately. These are going to be things that I think the curators and the set designers are going to know how to approach best. All that I can do as a player is just speculate on what might happen, and ultimately speculation is no good until we know what's going to happen. So I've speculated a couple things here as far as where things could go. I've posited potential berry fermenter change. But ultimately, don't take all of that with a grain of salt as far as where things could be going. I can't know how the curators are going to be changing things, but what I can do is have faith in that they will be changing the format for the better. And that's all we can do, right? Trust in the curators wanting to make this format as fun as possible because they like this format, and they like having fun with this format, and they like other people having fun with this format. I think all in all, this was a fun deck. It felt bad to be boarding out Imposing Iteration so often, but being entirely honest, I think this was kind of a miss. It's such a funny thing, too, I spent the entire way up to the GP saying, I wasn't going to cave, I wasn't going to play Imposing Iteration, I was going to try and avoid it if I can. Then I played one league match and with Imposing Iteration, and I won both games because of Imposing Iteration, and I was like, all right, I'm sold. And it never really came up. It was very often put to the bottom with Journey Begins, which felt pretty rough. And I think it got stuck in our hand in one game. I think it got stuck in our hand in a game against Ricky because we never found one of our colorless sources, which is the fault of mine, not putting in Singleton Wastes, but didn't really want to have a Singleton Wastes in my otherwise still 3-color deck that only wanted the wastes for 2 copies of Imposing Iteration. And especially since I was boarding out the iterations every single game, like I guess I could have gone down to 20 land, like if I had 2 swamps and 1 wastes, and I could board out the wastes for another sideboard slot, but I don't want to go down to 20 lands either. So it's a hard choice to make. I think iteration's fine. I think especially if the sack outlets get hit, I think that's a boon for iteration overall. Because the sack outlets are a big anti-synergy with Imposing Iteration. You're using Berry Fermenter and Scrap Weight to burn a bunch of your berries. Same with Deadly Dispute and Extraction Ritual to an extent. And that really does conflict a little bit with Imposing Iteration just wanting to have a critical mass of artifacts, which is awkward. It's an awkward tension to have. But I think this deck is fun. I think this deck is fine. It's a little egregious. There are some things that I think are not okay as far as the play patterns for this deck. And again, I'm going to be submitting all of this on the feedback form on my thoughts on the deck and how healthy it is for the metagame, which is to say I don't think it is. I don't think it's healthy for the future of this format, but it was fun to play with it while it lasted. And I think there is the bones of something that is fair and fun here, to be sure. And I think that's true of the format at large as well. I think Harbor Mail is a bit egregious, but I think the power of, I think Warden of Depths and Aqua Crew running around this format is actually really exciting. People are playing these 5 and 6 mana control finishers, and they're really thriving. So that's really exciting to see, but Harbor Mail is just a little bit too much as well there. So we'll see how the format shakes out going into February. And of course, we'll have a patch notes review video coming as soon as we know what gets changed. But in the meantime, thank you all so much for going on this journey with me. And good luck to Zangy and the rest of the competitors in the top cut. Definitely some fun decks in the top cut, to be sure. And I may still cover the finals depending on when they play and if I'm available. So if that ends up being recorded, I'll see you then, and otherwise I'll see you at the patch notes video. Take care, and I'll see you all in the Revolution chat.